as we're trained in the arts, I gotta say that a lot of our arts education is deeply colonized and comes from a European perspective, but you at the very least understand the role of religious imagery in European art specifically, and how the church used that as, I guess, devotional tools and as catechism. Art has always been used to teach in some way. So I found it, I mean, and this piece really is in the style of a religious art motif. So I just found it to be a natural extension, but also, you know, I'm theologically trained in the Black liberation tradition. I'm theologically trained in womanist theological thought. And so how I would approach any art would be from a womanist perspective. It would be from a perspective that would center the experience of the Black woman and our wisdom and our practices and our communal knowledge. And that is the lens through which you're going to hear the story. I'm going to tell it through a Black woman's eyes. The entire community is going to benefit, but the messenger is going to be a Black woman. The message is going to be decidedly related to the experience of Black women. And I think that that's important. That is probably what's missing from our very colonized art education. It is the fact that you can have artistic and religious and hermeneutical expression come from lenses that aren't of the dominant culture, and they can be transformative for the entire world. I hope that answered the question.
And it reminds us to think about a Black liberation theological framework, even as we encounter your pieces, that if we think of the work of James Cone, Crossing the Lynching Tree, if we recognize, as we can begin to have conversations, and you invite us to think about and to have conversations about Jesus the crucified, as Jesus the lynched man, as we have to encounter and have that conversation when we look at your pieces and we think about the lynching of the child Emmett Till, this young teen boy. Thank you so much for that. And is there anything else that we should be thinking about that you want us to consider and think about?
I think what you just said touched on something. The whole point of this piece is to lift up narratives and perspectives that too often get marginalized, swept off to the side. And if we aren't understanding Emmett Till as Jesus, as a lynched young man, as someone who was killed for no good reason, as a member of a marginalized, occupied group of people, if we can't see that experience, if we cannot make the connections between someone whom so many of us claim to worship and the very people for whom we march in the streets. And I say this as a minister in a predominantly white denomination. If we don't see the connection between Jesus of Nazareth and Emmett Till, between Jesus of Nazareth and Tamir Rice, between Jesus of Nazareth and Tatiana Jefferson, between Jesus of Nazareth and George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, if we can't see that connection, we are missing a huge chunk of the message that had been entrusted to us some couple of millennia ago. What we actually worship in the church too often is empire. And what we need to lift is the story of an occupied, oppressed, repressed carpenter teacher who threatened the empire. And that's the reason he was killed. It wasn't just about you and your little sins. He was killed because of what threat he presented. That needs to be made plain.